Hello students, welcome to the lecture series on industrial relations and labor laws. We will continue our discussion on introduction to industrial relations and this is part 3. I am Professor Shoma Sengupta, Kamla Nehru College, University of Delhi. In this lecture, we will cover the following two topics: genesis of industrial relations and evolution of industrial relations in India. To begin with, the genesis of industrial relations. Now, it is a kind of a master-servant dynamic or master-servant relationship which is an age-old phenomena, but in real sense it started with the industrial revolution. So, industrial relations originated from the 18th to the 19th century industrial revolution, and it evolved from a master-servant dynamic, as I said, and initially it was just a master-servant dynamic, but when mass scale production started, mass scale employment took place, so it became a complex system of interaction between workers, employers and the state, that is the government, and this actually led to the exploitation of labor also during industrial revolution. Now, if we talk about the stages of industrial relations, so it began with the industrial revolution. So, the first stage, as I said, is when organized sector came into picture, and that was industrial revolution. So, the focus shifted production to large scale factories, creating and thus disrupting the labor markets. So, mass scale productions or large scale factories came into picture, and with that there was rise of capitalism, and this led to actually a segregation of the classes, one considered as the capitalists or the owners and another the working class, and actually it took the shape of oppressor and oppressed also. But nevertheless, we can say it was rise of capitalism, the spread of capitalist economies were created, and it created new and often adversarial employment relationship also, and with that came many problems. So, the third stage was the actually eruption of different problems with the exploitation of labor, which became quite common or prominent during that phase. And what type of exploitation was there? Like low wages, unsafe working conditions, long hours of work, all these were the problems. Then came the fourth stage, and that was initial unrest. So, with poor working condition or labor problems, low wages, workers' discontent led to high employee turnover and often violent strikes also. So, this resulted into the development of formal labor management system. And then came the fifth stage, and that was the trade union development. So, workers organized themselves to form trade unions. So, this led to the efforts of workers to negotiate. They got the bargaining power, and previously the owners resisted the negotiation, but because of the organized trade unions, they had to enter into negotiations. So, the World War I was also going on, so it highlighted the importance of labor union in strengthening workers' bargaining power. Then came the formal international body, and this was a very important development in industrial relations. That was the establishment of the Industrial Labour Organization ILO, which took place in 1919, and this influenced global labor legislation and industrial relations. In many countries, government intervention started after the formation of ILO, and since it shifted from laissez-faire type of leadership to regulating working hours and rights and accelerated by the ILO. And finally, it took the shape of an academic discipline, and you know that IR is nowadays taught in MBA as well as undergrad courses and postgraduate courses. So, the genesis was like foundation of this discipline in 1920s by thinkers like John R. Commons, which helped it to take a professionalism status. So they professionalized the field of industrial relations. Now also many literature came into picture. Now it is an age old phenomena. So in comparison to other disciplines, industrial relations still is at its infancy. So it is of recent origin if we compare it with other disciplines. Though the activity in itself is a very old concept. So Richardson has said that industrial relations are as old as industry, and being inherent in industry will always remain as a feature of industrial life. So wherever there is an industry, there is industrial relations. A few of early writings in the field of IR were by Sidney and Brettis Webb's A History of Trade Unionism and then Industrial Democracy. So literature gave a factual detail of then prevailing practices, but the theories and explanations were lagging behind, and that is why it covered only a limited aspect of industrial relations. First decade of the 20th century, in that phase, this term, that is IR, was described in many ways like labor management, employment management, personnel management, labor relations, industrial relations and employment relations. Now this is IR is an umbrella term, and it is used to describe the entire area of study and practice, and that was industrial relations. So it covered work and employment relations, problems and issues affecting both employers and employees, practices of both employer and worker organizations. So the management of labor or personnel management or administration became a separate area of study, and the relationship between employer and employees engaged as a new field of study by 1930s, and this was named as labor relations. So you can see how it started with a simple master servant relationship, and then it took the shape of an entire discipline of labor relations or industrial relations. So since 1960, a disintegration took place between two terms, that is personal management, and it was substituted by human resource management, because labor was considered as human resources rather than just as personnel. Later industrial relations transformed from a broad to a narrow perspective when the focus shifted to collective bargaining and on union management relationship. So rather than only the entire industrial relation, the focus shifted to only union management relationship. There were two distinct schools of thought which emerged. First was institutional labor economics, and second is HRM school. So institutional labor economics emphasized workers and community solution to labor problems, while HRM school argued in favor of employers' solution to labor problems. So first we will discuss the institutional labor economics or school of thought, or ILE school of thought. So they talked about workers and community solution to labor problems. So worker solution came from trade unionism and collective bargaining. So they will strive towards coming to a solution, and a community solution by protective and regulative labor legislation and social insurance of labor problems. It is also considered as an external or outside the firm perspective on the solution of labor problems. Now, it talked more about unions, labor legislation, government. So that is why the emphasis was on institutional support in solving the problems. Then came the HRM school of thought. Now, in HRM school of thought, employers' solution to labor problems was emphasized, and this was internal or inside the firm perspective, and it talked about building the community of interest between labor management, of for which employer has to take the initiative. Then there are other schools of thought which emphasize institutional intervention. Now, coming to the present status of study of industrial relations. So now IR developed as a branch of behavioral sciences. It is taking cues from psychology, sociology and it is cultivating internal processes of human behavior. HRM school also promoted this practice of strategic management, organizational development, organizational design and management. The employer's solution to labor problem is assuming greater importance nowadays. So, it is tilted towards HRM school of thought, where the onus is on employer to bring a solution to the labor problems. Now, coming to the next heading, that is industrial relations in India. So, let us discuss the status of industrial relations in India over the years. So, India was greatly advanced in the field of industry and commerce from the very past, and as is evidence from the ancient literature also. In ancient times, the highest occupation in our country was agriculture, followed by trading, and manual services formed the third ring of occupation. So, small manufacturers in their cottages, mostly on hereditary basis, carried on a large number of occupation. So, that was family based or hereditary based manufacturing which was done in a way in a cottage industry kind of thing. Ancient scriptures and laws of our country laid emphasis on promotion and maintenance of peaceful relation between capital and labor. So, from the very early days, craftsmen and workers felt the necessity of being united. So, the utility of unions has been stated in our ancient literature also, like Shukla Yajurveda Samhita. If you go by that, so what it states, if men are united, nothing can deter them. So, that means they are talking about remaining united. So, workers and union formation was emphasized, although they were these were only family based businesses or craftsmanship which was going on. Now, in Kautilya's Arthashastra also, it gives a comprehensive picture of the organization and functions of social and political institutions of India, and a good description of unions of employees, craftsmanship and artisans. So, formation of union, you can see in India, when we talk about India, it has its genesis in the ancient era as well. There were well organized guild also, which worked according to their own bylaws for the management of unions. However, there were no organizations of workers during the long Mughal rule. So, the laborers were entirely dependent on their masters, and forced work was taken from them during the Mughal era. Historical evidence further shows the existence of codes of conduct and prescribed procedure for the settlement of disputes for promoting cordial relations between the parties. The working relations, however, in those days were more or less of a personal character and are very much distinguishable from the present day industrial relations, which was gradually developed with the growth of large scale industries. Now, coming to the stages of industrial relations in India. Now, a study of modern industrial relations in India can be made in three distinct phases. The first phase can be considered to have commenced from the middle of the 19th century and ended by the end of the First World War. The second phase comprises the period thereafter till the attainment of independence in 1947, and the third phase represents the post-independence era. So, let us discuss these stages one by one. The first phase of IR in India, which was, as we said, mid 19th century it began. British government in India was largely interested in enforcing penalties for breach of contract. So, exact oppressed relationship was there during the British government. So, they would penalize, penalties were there if there was a breach of contract in employment. So, they used to regulate the working conditions of work with a view to minimize the competitive advantage of indigenous employers against the British employers. So, they were more interested in mass scale production as well as controlling the labor cost. A series of legislative measures were adopted during the latter half of 19th century, which can be considered as the beginning of industrial relations in India. So, the close of First World War created certain social, economic and political conditions that raised new hopes among the people for a new social order. So, there was intense labor unrest also, because workers' earnings did not keep pace with the rise in prices. So, the constitutional developments in India led to the election of representatives to the central and provincial legislatures, who took a leading role in initiating social legislation. So, when elections started taking place, some of the legislation were also passed after the governments were elected. The establishment of ILO in 1919 was a major step towards not only IR in the world, but also in India. So, it greatly influenced the labor legislation and industrial relation policy in India. And the emergence of trade unions also took place, and one of the first trade union was All India Trade Union Congress, AITUC, in 1920. This was a significant event in the development of IR in India. Then came the second phase of IR in India. Now, the policy after the First World War related to improvement in working condition and social security benefit. So, a number of laws were enacted for the implementation of above policy, that is working condition and social security benefits, under the British rule only. So, the Trade Dispute Act 1929 is a landmark act which sought to provide a conciliation machinery to bring about peaceful settlement of dispute. So, this act gave a platform for the workers and the trade unions to come to an amicable solution for different disputes between the labor and management. The Royal Commission on Labour 1929 surveyed labor problems in India, and they different factors: working condition, health, safety, welfare, and they made certain recommendations, and that became part of different orders of the government as well as laws. So, the exigencies of the war made it essential for the government to maintain an adequately contented labor force for maximizing production, otherwise there was a kind of an unrest. So, Government of India stepped in and assumed wide powers of regulating the conditions of work and welfare of the industrial workers. It embarked upon a twofold action. One was statutory regulation of industrial relations through the Defence of India rules and the orders. And second was bringing all the interests together at a common forum for shaping labour policy. So, the tripartite consultative system was established. The Royal Commission of Labour recommended the need for tripartite labour machinery on the pattern of ILO. This epitomizes the faith of India in ILO's philosophy and objective, because they abided by it and they formed this tripartite consultative system. So, in 1942, the first tripartite labour conference was held at New Delhi. Tripartite means three parties. So, the labour and their organization, that is trade union, the management or the owners of the organization, as well as the state. So, that's why three parties. So, it was held at New Delhi under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The conference consisted of two organizations, Indian Labour Conference and Standing Labour Committee. So, the objective of tripartite bodies were promotion of uniformity in labour legislation, laying down of a procedure for the settlement of industrial disputes, discussion of employers-employees matters of all India importance. So, these bodies like ILC and SLC have immensely contributed in achieving the objectives set before them, and they facilitated enactment of central legislation and enabled discussion on all labour matters of national importance. Different social, economic and administrative matters concerning labour policies and programs were discussed in the various meetings of ILC and SLC. Then state labor advisory boards were established in consultation to consult on matters, labor matters in the states. So, for the problems of the state, this state labor advisory boards were established. So, gradually but tripartism systems or developed into a full-fledged system, a kind of parliament for labor and management. Coming to the last phase, that is the third phase of IR in India. After independence, an industrial truce resolution was adopted in 1947. The conference emphasized the need for respecting the mutuality of interest between labor and capital. That is, importance of both, that is labor and capital, was emphasized. It recommended to the parties the method of mutual discussion of all problems common to both and settle all disputes without recourse to interruption or slowing down of production. The post-independence period of industrial relation policy aimed at the establishment of peace in the industry and grant a fair deal to workers. The government sought to achieve these aims through appropriate labor legislation, labor administration and industrial adjudication. State intervention in industrial relations was justified on the ground that it helped to check the growth of industrial unrest. And we will discuss in detail the industrial policies or 5-year policies and their impact of industrial relations in post-independence era. However, it was noticed that the spirit of litigation grew and delays attended on legal processes gave rise to widespread dissatisfaction. So, hence in 1958, adjudication processes were introduced. Also, it emphasized on industrial democracy. So, third phase also saw the rise of industrial democracy on prevention of unrest by timely action at appropriate stages and giving of adequate attention to the root cause of industrial unrest. So, let us summarize what we have studied in this lecture. Industrial relations originated from the 18th to 19th century industrial revolution. It passed through the stages of industrial revolution, capitalism, unrest, rise of trade unions, government intervention and finally as an academic discipline. Two distinct schools of thoughts in industrial relations emerged, that is the institutional labor economics ILE, which emphasized workers and community solutions to labor problems, and the HRM school that argued in favor of employers' solution to labor problems. The industrial relations in India passed through three phases. The first phase commenced from the 19th century and ended by the end of the First World War. And here we can talk about we talked about the ancient system of production and our ancient philosophies. Also the Mughal era, that was the situation, and then came the British regime. So, the second phase continued till 1947 and the third phase is the post-independence era, whereby many reforms took place and many legislations were passed. We will discuss this third phase in detail when we will talk about the 5-year plans and its impact on industrial relations in the next lecture. For your reference, you can go through some of the books that I have mentioned. One is by P.R.N. Sinha and others, Industrial Relations, Trade Unions and Labor Legislation. It is a Pearson publication. Then one book by P.K. Padhi, Industrial Relations, Prentice Hall of India publication. You can also look for material in a website of eGyankosh that will be quite helpful for you. Thank you students, have a nice day.